Today we inaugurate the first annual Nelson Mandela Lecture. The lecture is part of a series of events being held this week to celebrate Nelson Mandela, the person and his contribution in creating a better world. The Nelson Mandela Annual Lecture will be developed as a prestigious public lecture, attracting the best intellectual voices in the world. It will add to the larger public dialogue on critical social issues. The purpose of launching the Nelson Mandela Annual Lecture is twofold. First, it will be an occasion to celebrate Nelson Mandela's legacy. Secondly, it will provide a forum for the critical consideration of challenging social issues that confront us in the 21st century.
On this day, on every day, let us be inspired by Nelson Mandela, the truly symbol of human greatness.
And welcome to the very first virtual Nelson Mandela Annual Lecture. Wherever you are in South Africa and in other parts of the world, I bring you greetings from the trustees and staff of the Nelson Mandela Foundation. Avusheni, Nyanvusela, Sanbonani, Tobela, Dumelang, Lochani, Huyedag, Molweni, Sanbona, Nda. My name is Silo Hatang, and I'm the CEO of the Nelson Mandela Foundation. I greet you all in all of South Africa's official languages as a statement of solidarity in times of dislocation, disruption, and rupture. I'm confident that the Secretary General, Guterres, will have much more to say about the importance of solidarity globally. Friends, we live in momentous times. COVID-19 has brought with it a sense of both peril and promise. It has exposed in cruel ways what human societies had come to normalize: inequality, racism, and ecological depredation. It has taken many lives and destroyed many more, and it is calling us to change human behaviors fundamentally. In this context, it is perfectly timely that we have the United Nations Secretary General as our speaker, and perfectly appropriate that the title of the lecture is Tackling the Inequality Pandemic, a New Social Contract for a New Era. Friends, as I'm sure you all know, earlier this week, we lost the youngest daughter of Nelson Mandela and Winnie Madikizela Mandela, Zinzi Mandela. We are in mourning for a special human being who was always there for us. We dedicate the 18th Nelson Mandela Annual Lecture to her memory. Like her mother, she was a fighter. She had resilience, and she cared about people, especially the excluded and the discarded. These are all qualities we will need as we face the challenge of COVID-19 and the bigger challenge of building a transformative post-COVID world. The only way we can beat this virus is to work together in solidarity. And with that, we are also pleased to announce that the Nelson Mandela Foundation, in partnership with One Campaign and MTB base, will be launching a COVID-19 anthem today, with 10 of Africa's biggest musical artists that will be played at the end of today's proceedings. We want to share with you a short tribute to Sis Zinzi Mandela, courtesy of Anand Singh and Video Vision. We came to know her as a friend, and we will always miss her.
My mother tried getting us into schools in Soweto, and the black principals then were very scared of police harassment. They were afraid to take us because one or two had already experienced, harassment from the security police for having us there. Then we had to use, we changed our surnames, and my mother took us to, a colored school in town. And there as well, the security police caught up with, with us and, had us kicked out of that school. And this went on and on in about 6 or 7 schools here in South Africa, in town, where we were just chucked out, we wouldn't even spend a month, we'd be kicked out, until such time that some friends of my mother's heard about our plight, and then they offered to have us educated in Swaziland.
Knowing Mama's strength and charisma and her determination, tremendous respect that I have for her strength as a woman, that she was able to be a single parent, and she was able to put a smile on her face, always hold her head up high. We never saw her fall apart.
My father says, I cannot and will not give any undertaking at a time when I and you, the people, are not free. Your freedom and mine cannot be separated. I will return. Amanda!
A letter that he wrote to me that I obviously didn't get, where he was analyzing my poetry and so on. It was very touching, it was quite emotional. It is like some kind of personal comfort that at least the world recognizes the sacrifices that he's made, that he wasn't able to father us for many years, that when he was incarcerated, he suffered many losses whilst in prison, personal losses, but he still came out to be a man of peace and reconciliation. I'm glad that that is being documented and shared, and that people continue to celebrate his life. I think it's very important for us to try to help implement his vision for South Africa, for South African children, for the youth in general, for the world, for everybody to realize. Now I think that the saying is it's in your hands. That's what the legacy institutions are saying. That's what he has said, I'm handing over. I think it's so important, for us just to, let go, let him be. I would do it all again. I can't imagine, that's all I've known. Everything else is just a fantasy. And what I've learned from this is to define myself not according to what I've suffered, the anguish and so on, but according to how I've survived that. And I think it's an important lesson, especially as in my capacity as a mother, as a grandmother. It's very important for me to be able to demonstrate that type of resilience and ability to see, to have a more holistic approach to life for the sake of my children, especially during difficult times.
It is now my singular honor to introduce to you President Cyril Ramaphosa. He has contributed a pre-recorded message for this occasion in the midst of what is a punishing schedule. But of course, for South Africans, when you see the president on TV, you never know what he will be bringing. He could easily be bringing back Phuza Thursday and cigarettes, or he could be sending us back straight to our homes. He has also mastered the art of confusing us with his greetings. We thought we worked out. When he says this, it means we're back home. Now it's very confusing. I should tell you that earlier today, he and Sia and Rachel Kolisi joined me in a Mandela Day activation at a Soweto orphanage, Ikageng. Again, as is his wont, he demonstrated that he believes in the call to make every day a Mandela Day. He listens to the views and the demands of society's most vulnerable people and works tirelessly to find ways of doing differently in times that demand change. He keeps reminding us that the South Africa which will emerge after COVID-19 will not be the South Africa of 2019. The world will be a new world, which will demand imagination and commitment from all of us. I always feel encouraged whenever I spend time with him, for he has both these qualities and a steely determination to find a way. Let us listen to his words to us today.
I greet you on behalf of the people of South Africa and would like to thank the United Nations and the international community for the great honor they've bestowed on our icon, Nelson Mandela. This year's International Mandela Day is tinged with sadness. It is with profound sorrow that we received the sad news of the passing of Zinzi Mandela, the youngest daughter of President Nelson Mandela and Winnie Madikizela Mandela. Zinzi Mandela was a brave activist when her father was in prison and endured the hardships of banishment and harassment. After democracy, she served her country and her people with distinction as South Africa's ambassador to Denmark. We are all saddened by her passing. On the 18th of July every year, we celebrate Nelson Mandela's life. His was a life lived in the service of others. We celebrate the triumph of the human spirit over adversity. On this day, we are all called upon to perform 67 minutes of service in memory of a man who believed that just one small act of kindness can make the world of difference in the lives of others. Nelson Mandela was undoubtedly one of the greatest leaders of our time. He was a hero of South Africa's liberation struggle, but he was not ours alone. He belonged to peace-loving and freedom-loving peoples all over the world. His commitment to advancing freedom made him the father of not just our nation, but of every nation. His legacy in fighting apartheid is all the more relevant today. Across the world, people are rising and taking a firm stance against racism, injustice, and inequality. In his memory, we must strive all the harder to build societies that are rooted in mutual respect, tolerance, and reconciliation. This year, we celebrate International Mandela Day in the shadow of a global pandemic. Coronavirus has devastated the lives of many people and the livelihoods of societies across the world. Yet, inspired by Mandela's spirit of compassion and care, this pandemic has revived the bonds of solidarity amongst nations of the world. The outpouring of goodwill has been on a scale rarely witnessed in modern times. The goodwill and solidarity has manifested itself through donations of diagnostics and therapeutic medical supplies, as well as food parcels to those who are in need. Our acts of care and solidarity should also deepen our collaboration to address humankind's most pressing challenges: better education, eliminating poverty and underdevelopment, food security, climate change, and gender-based violence. The UN Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, will address the Nelson Mandela Annual Lecture on tackling the inequality pandemic, a new social contract for a new era. This is a theme that goes to the heart of the immense task that lies before us. Even as we live in these troubled times, it was Nelson Mandela who taught us to remain courageous and to persevere. We have it within us to rise above the devastation brought about by this pandemic. I wish everyone a meaningful International Mandela Day. Thank you.
We thank you, President Ramaphosa, for this reflection, for encouragement to keep working hard in testing times, and for your reminder that the legacy of Madiba is a living one. The chairman of the Nelson Mandela Foundation's Board of Trustees has also contributed a pre-recorded message for today. Professor Njabulo Ndebele was appointed as a trustee 21 years ago by Nelson Mandela and is the only remaining founding trustee. We draw heavily on his wise counsel, his probing analysis, and his calm in a storm. Needless to say, these are attributes which have been called on more than ever in this time of COVID-19.
Siyanibingelela nonke lapho nikhona. I send warm greetings from the Nelson Mandela Foundation to all our audiences in South Africa and around the world on the day Nelson Mandela was born 102 years ago. On behalf of the Foundation's Board of Trustees and staff, I thank you for supporting the 18th Nelson Mandela Annual Lecture with your participation from wherever you are in the world. Although we are unable to host Secretary General Antonio Guterres in South Africa in person, we warmly embrace the historical moment of the very first virtual Nelson Mandela Annual Lecture. As we ponder the emergence of fresh realities in the world in the light of the receding relevance of old ones, it is significant that our distinguished guest, the Secretary General of the United Nations, will address us on the theme, Tackling the Inequality Pandemic, a New Social Contract for a New Era. Since our 13th annual lecture in 2015, when Professor Thomas Piketty showed how structural inequality was a legacy passed on from one generation to the next, amplified their structural infirmities and illnesses. It has amplified injustice, sectarianism, racism, casteism, and above all, class inequality. The historic implications of this moment are that both within countries and between continents, the historic insidiousness of the inequality pandemic has emerged clearly in the face of the centuries-old ideology of white supremacy and the racism that gave birth to it. For many decades in South Africa, white supremacy was crudely displayed on the false pedestal of racial pride. Many people of goodwill around the world supported the oppressed South Africans to bring down that pedestal. It should never be forgotten that the anti-apartheid struggle was an international movement. It brought together many people around the world who believed in the dignity of all people. At the time, many powerful countries in the world cheered and appeared to condemn apartheid all at once. They got richer and richer, while the victims of white supremacy in South Africa and those in other struggling countries around the world got poorer and poorer. The legacy of cheering and condemning still lives with us in the form of what Piketty calls the global inequality regime. While corporate elites around the world have sought to render such a regime normal, the global crisis of COVID-19 and the public killing of George Floyd have combined to reveal with dramatic effect the resilient and deadly connection between structural wealth and structural poverty. It is a connection that has shaped global trade and the politics of the management of that trade for some 500 years. An opportunity has come for the peoples of the world to remake not only the internal order within their respective countries, but also the global order through a shared understanding that in the new ethics of the global order, business cannot be separated from the necessity to uphold at the same time the shared human dignity of all people involved in the creation and management of the economies of the world. Vast profits can no longer be made at the expense of the vast majority of the peoples of the world. In his new book, Capital and Ideology, Piketty argues that dismantling the inequality regime is unimaginable without transnational justice and a move towards what he calls global federalism. The various forms of nationalist and identitarian retreats which we see gathering pace across the world will undermine fundamentally attempts to agree on a new social contract and to build a new world order. Nelson Mandela had the prescience to anticipate this very moment, both in its technical and its human features. This is what he said: "In a world in which technology and communication have shortened the space between erstwhile prohibitively distant lands, where outdated beliefs and imaginary differences among people were being rapidly eradicated, where exclusiveness was giving way to cooperation and interdependence, we too found ourselves obliged to shed our narrow outlook and adjust to fresh realities. Who better to speak to this challenge and to interpret for us this moment than the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres? We are grateful to you, sir, for accepting our invitation, and to your office for enabling you to give the lecture in extraordinary circumstances. We have followed closely Mr. Guterres' leadership of the UN through these months of COVID-19. And so too have we appreciated the work of other global organizations, such as the World Health Organization, and the enormous sense of responsibility they have shown in providing global leadership through the scourges of COVID-19. There can be no better time than to reaffirm the importance of such global organizations as the United Nations organization. We in South Africa, of course, have followed Mr. Guterres' career across much longer trajectories. We remember his support for the anti-apartheid movement, his role in building a post-dictatorship and post-colonial order in Portugal, and his many contributions to building cultures of international cooperation. We are grateful for his unstinting promotion of the Nelson Mandela International Day from the moment he became UN Secretary General. How appropriate that he delivers the 18th Nelson Mandela Annual Lecture on the 18th of July this year. This alone will give Mandela Day 2020 a very special quality. It is with a great sense of anticipation that I, on behalf of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, our trustees and staff, and our friends and guests around the world, warmly welcome UN Secretary General Mr. Guterres to this platform to address us.
Thank you very much, Prof. Prof, what you're not seeing is that we're getting so many messages of people. Where do we connect? How do we get the lecture? So please go to www.nelsonmandela.org so that you can then watch the lecture. I think you will agree with me that in just a few minutes, Professor Njabulo Ndebele has provoked our thinking, set the stage for our annual lecture deliberations, and introduced our annual lecturer. Not that the UN Secretary General really needs an introduction. Both the position he occupies and the work he has been doing are well known across the world. I was privileged to meet him in person for the first time in New York in 2018, where I experienced his hospitality and was exposed directly to his passion for justice. Back then, I expressed a wish and a dream that he could one day address us as the Nelson Mandela Foundation. Little did we know that 2 years later, he is doing precisely that. During COVID-19, he has excelled as a global leader, a trusted voice in uncertain times. And again, the World Health Organization has risen to the challenge. He is a leader who reaches beyond the imperative simply to protect human rights by demanding of us that we all strive to make just societies. The Secretary General was meant to join us in South Africa at Northwest University as part of a visit, but unfortunately, due to the pandemic, was not able to make it. I thought of him a couple weeks ago when I encountered a young woman with Women for Girls here in Johannesburg who had lost her sight due to diabetes complications and could not access simple procedure which would restore her sight. Mabel Maleka. We, together with Women for Girls, did what needed to be done to protect her rights, and with the help of a caring medical team led by Dr. Tebogo Maleka, her sight was restored. But it can't be right that vulnerable people depend on acts of charity to enjoy the basic benefits and services. How do we create a society in which a young woman like Mabel Maleka not only receives what is her right, but also thrives as a human being and fulfills all her dreams and potential? Secretary General, I know that your lecture will speak to this question. I know that you will inspire us to keep working for that vision. We can't wait to hear from you. Over to you, sir.
My dear friends, President Cyril Ramaphosa, Excellencies, distinguished guests, friends. It is a privilege to join you in honoring Nelson Mandela an extraordinary global leader, advocate, and role model. I thank the Nelson Mandela Foundation for this opportunity and commend their work to keep his vision alive. And I send my deepest condolences to the Mandela family and to the government and people of South Africa on the untimely passing of Ambassador Zinzi Mandela earlier this week. May she rest in peace. I was fortunate enough to meet Nelson Mandela several times. I will never forget his wisdom, determination, and compassion, which shone forth in everything he said and did. Last August, in my holidays, I visited Madiba's cell at Robben Island. I stood there, looking through the bars, humbled again by his enormous mental strength and incalculable courage. Nelson Mandela spent 27 years in prison, 18 of them at Robben Island. But he never allowed this experience to define him or his life. Nelson Mandela rose above his jailers to liberate millions of South Africans and become a global inspiration and a modern icon. He devoted his life to fighting the inequality that has reached crisis proportions around the world in recent decades and that poses a growing threat to our future. And so today, on Madiba's birthday, I will talk about how we can address the many mutually reinforcing strands and layers of inequality before they destroy our economies and societies. Dear friends, COVID-19 is shining a spotlight on this injustice. The world is in turmoil, economies are in free fall, and we have been brought to our knees by a microscopic virus. The pandemic has demonstrated the fragility of our world. It has laid bare risks we have ignored for decades: inadequate health systems, gaps in social protection, structural inequalities, environmental degradation, the climate crisis. Entire regions that were making progress on eradicating poverty and narrowing inequality have been set back years in a matter of months. The virus poses the greatest risk to the most vulnerable: those living in poverty, older people, and people with disabilities and pre-existing conditions. And health workers are on the front lines, with more than 4,000 infected in South Africa alone. I pay tribute to them. In some countries, health inequalities are amplified as not just private hospitals, but businesses and even individuals are ordering precious equipment that is urgently needed for everyone. A tragic example of inequality. The economic fallout of the pandemic is affecting those who work in the informal economy, small and medium-sized businesses, and people with caring responsibilities who are mainly women. We face the deepest global recession since World War II and the broadest collapse in incomes since 1870. 100 million more people could be pushed into extreme poverty, and we could see famines of historic proportions. COVID-19 has been likened to an X-ray, revealing fractures in the fragile skeleton of the societies we have built. It is exposing fallacies, falsehoods everywhere. The lie that free markets can deliver health care for all. The fiction that unpaid care work is not work. The delusion that we live in a post-racist world. The myth that we are all in the same boat. Because while we are all floating on the same sea, it is clear that some are in super yachts, with others are clinging to drifting debris. Dear friends, inequality defines our time. More than 70% of the world's people are living with rising income and wealth inequality. The 26 richest people in the world hold as much wealth as half the global population. But income, pay, and wealth are not the only measures of inequality. People's chances in life depend on their gender, family, and ethnic background. The anger feeding two recent social movements reflects utter disillusionment with the status quo. Women everywhere have called time on one of the most egregious examples of gender inequality: violence perpetrated by powerful men against women who are simply trying to do their jobs. And the anti-racist movement that has spread from the United States around the world in the aftermath of George Floyd's killing is one more sign that people have had enough. Enough of inequality and discrimination that treats people as criminals on the basis of their skin color. Enough of the structural racism and systematic injustice that deny people their fundamental human rights. These movements point to two of the historic sources of inequality in our world: colonialism and patriarchy. The global north, especially my own continent of Europe, imposed colonial rule on much of the global south for centuries through violence and coercion. Colonialism created vast inequality within and between countries, including the evils of the transatlantic slave trade and the apartheid regime here in South Africa. After the Second World War, the creation of the United Nations was based on a new global consensus around equality and human dignity, and the wave of decolonization swept the world. But let's not fool ourselves. The legacy of colonialism still reverberates. We see this in the economic and social injustice, the rise of hate crimes and xenophobia, the persistence of institutionalized racism and white supremacy. We see this in the global trade system. Economies that were colonized are at greater risk of getting locked into the production of raw materials and low-tech goods, a new form of colonialism. And we see this in global power relations. Africa has been a double victim. First, as a target of the colonial project. Second, African countries are underrepresented in the international institutions that were created after the Second World War, because before, most of them had won independence. The nations that came out on top more than 7 decades ago have refused to contemplate the reforms needed to change power relations in international institutions. The composition and voting rights in the United Nations Security Council and the boards of the Bretton Woods system are a case in point. Inequality starts at the top, in global institutions. Addressing inequality must start by reforming them. And let's not forget another great source of inequality in our world: millennia of patriarchy. We live in a male-dominated world with a male-dominated culture. Everywhere, women are worse off than men simply because they are women. Inequality and discrimination are the norm. Violence against women, including femicide, is at epidemic levels. And globally, women are still excluded from senior positions in governments and on corporate boards. Fewer than 1 in 10 world leaders is a woman. Gender inequality harms everyone because it prevents us from benefiting from the intelligence and experience of all of humanity. This is why, as a proud feminist, I have made gender equality a top priority and gender parity now a reality in top UN jobs. I urge leaders of all kinds to do the same. And I am pleased to announce that South Africa's Siya Kolisi is our new global champion for the United Nations European Union Spotlight Initiative, engaging other men in fighting the global scourge of violence against women and girls. Dear friends, recent decades have created new tensions and trends. Globalization and technological change have indeed fueled enormous gains in income and prosperity, and more than 1 billion people have moved out of extreme poverty. But the expansion of trade and technological progress have also contributed to an unprecedented shift in income distribution. Between 1980 and 2016, the world's richest 1% captured 27% of the total cumulative gross in income. Low-skilled workers face an onslaught from new technologies, automation, the offshoring of manufacturing, and the demise of labor organizations. Tax concessions, tax avoidance, and tax evasion remain widespread. Corporate tax rates have fallen. And this has reduced resources to invest in the very services that can reduce inequality: social protection, education, healthcare. And the new generation of inequalities goes beyond income and wealth to encompass the knowledge and skills needed to succeed in today's world. Deep disparities begin before birth and define lives and early death. More than 50% of 20-year-olds in countries with very high human development are in higher education. In low human development countries, that figure is 3%. Even more shocking, some 17% of the children born 20 years ago in countries with low human development have already died. Dear friends, looking to the future, Two seismic shifts will shape the 21st century: the climate crisis and digital transformation. Both could widen inequalities even further. Some of the developments in today's tech and innovation hubs are cause for serious concern. The heavily male-dominated tech industry is not only missing out on half the world's expertise and perspectives, it is also using algorithms that could further entrench gender and racial discrimination. The digital divide reinforces social and economic divides from literacy to healthcare, from urban to rural, from kindergarten to college. In 2019, some 87% of people in developed countries use the internet, compared with just 19% in the least developed countries. We are in danger of a two-speed world. At the same time, by 2050, we estimate that accelerating climate change will affect millions of people through malnutrition, malaria and other diseases, migration, and extreme weather events. This creates serious threats to intergenerational equality and justice. Today's young climate protesters are on the front lines of the fight against inequality. The countries that are most affected by climate disruption did the least to contribute to global heating. The green economy will be a new source of prosperity and employment. But let's not forget that some people will lose their jobs, particularly in post-industrial rust belts of our world. And this is why we call not only for climate action, but climate justice. Political leaders must raise their ambition, businesses must raise their sights, and people everywhere must raise their voices. There is a better way, and we must take it. Dear friends, the corrosive effects of today's levels of inequality are clear. We are sometimes told a rising tide of economic growth lifts all boats, but rising inequality sinks all boats. Confidence in institutions and leaders is eroding. Voter turnout has fallen by a global average of 10% since the beginning of the 90s. And people who feel marginalized and vulnerable to arguments that blame their misfortune on others, particularly those who look or behave differently. But populism, nationalism, extremism, racism, and scapegoating will only create new inequalities and divisions within and between communities, between countries, between ethnicities, between religions. Dear friends, COVID-19 is a human tragedy, but it has also created a generational opportunity, an opportunity to build back a more equal and sustainable world. The response to the pandemic and to the widespread discontent that preceded it must be based on a new social contract and a new global deal that create equal opportunities for all and respect the rights and freedoms of all. This is the only way that we will meet the goals of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the Paris Agreement, and the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, agreements that address precisely the failures that are being exposed and exploited by the pandemic. A new social contract within societies will enable young people to live in dignity, will ensure women have the same prospects and opportunities as men, and will protect the sick, the vulnerable, and minorities of all kinds. Education and digital technology must be two great enablers and equalizers. As Nelson Mandela said, and I quote, "Education is the most powerful weapon we can use to change the world." As always, he said it first. Governments must prioritize equal access from early learning education. Neuroscience tells us that preschool education changes the lives of individuals and brings enormous benefits to communities and societies. So when the richest children are 7 times more likely than the poorest to attend preschool, it is no surprise that inequality is intergenerational. To deliver quality education for all, we need to more than double education spending in low and middle income countries by 2030 to $3 trillion a year. Within a generation, all children in low and middle income countries could have access to quality education at all levels. This is possible. We just have to decide to do it. And as technology transforms our world, learning facts and skills is not enough. Governments need to prioritize investment in digital literacy and infrastructure. Learning how to learn, adapt, and take on new skills will be essential. The digital revolution with artificial intelligence will change the nature of work, and the relationship between work, leisure, and other activities, some of which we cannot even imagine today. The roadmap for digital cooperation, launched at the United Nations last month, promotes a vision of an inclusive, sustainable digital future by connecting the remaining 4 billion people to the internet by 2030. The United Nations has also launched GIGA, an ambitious project to get every school in the world online. Technology can turbocharge the recovery from COVID-19 and the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Dear friends, growing gaps in trust between people, institutions, and leaders threaten us all. People want social and economic systems that work for everyone. They want their human rights and fundamental freedoms to be respected. They want a say in decisions that affect their lives. The new social contract between governments, people, civil society, businesses, and more must integrate employment, sustainable development, and social protection based on equal rights and opportunities for all. Labor market policies, combined with constructive dialogue between employers and labor representatives, can improve pay and working conditions. Labor representation is also critical to manage the challenges posed to jobs by technology and structural transformation, including the transition to a green economy. The labor movement has a proud history of fighting inequality and working for the rights and dignity of all. The gradual integration of the informal sector into social protection frameworks is essential. A changing world requires a new generation of social protection policies with new safety nets, including universal health coverage and the possibility of a universal basic income. Establishing minimum levels of social protection and reversing chronic underinvestment in public services, including education, healthcare, and internet access, are essential. But this is not enough to tackle entrenched inequalities. We need affirmative action programs and targeted policies to address and redress historic inequalities in gender, race, or ethnicity that have been reinforced by social norms. Taxation has also a role in the new social contract. Everyone, individuals and corporations, must pay their fair share. In some countries, there is a place for taxes that recognize that the wealthy and well-connected have benefited enormously from the state and from their fellow citizens. Governments would also shift the tax burden from payrolls to carbon. Taxing carbon rather than people will increase output and employment while reducing emissions. We must break the vicious circle of corruption, which is both a cause and effect of inequality. Corruption reduces and wastes funds available for social protection. It weakens social norms and the rule of law. And fighting corruption depends on accountability. And the greatest guarantee of accountability is a vibrant civil society, including a free, independent media and responsible social media platforms that encourage healthy debate. Dear friends, let's face the facts. The global political and economic system is not delivering on critical global public goods: public health, climate action, sustainable development, peace. The COVID-19 pandemic has brought home the tragic disconnect between self-interest and the common interest, and the huge gaps in governance structures and ethical frameworks. To close those gaps and to make the new social contract possible, we need a new global deal to ensure that power, wealth, and opportunities are shared more broadly and fairly at the international level. A new model for global governance must be based on full, inclusive, and equal participation in global institutions. Without that, we face even wider inequalities and gaps in solidarity, like those the fragmented global response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Developed countries are strongly invested in their own survival in the face of the pandemic, but they have failed to deliver enough support needed to help the developing world through the dangerous times. A new global deal based on a fair globalization, on the rights and dignity of every human being, on living in balance with nature, on taking account of the rights of future generations, and on success measured in human, rather economic terms, is the best way to change this. The worldwide consultation process around the 75th anniversary of the United Nations has made clear that people want a global governance system that delivers for them. The developing world must have a far stronger voice in global decision-making. We also need a more inclusive and balanced multilateral trading system that enables developing countries to move up global value chains. Illicit financial flows, money laundering, and tax evasion must be prevented. A global consensus to end tax havens is essential. We must work together to integrate the principles of sustainable development into financial decision-making. Financial markets must be full partners in shifting the flow of resources away from the brown and the grey to the green, the sustainable, and the equitable. And reform of the debt architecture and access to affordable credit must create fiscal space for countries to move investment in the same direction. Dear friends, Nelson Mandela said, and I quote, "One of the challenges of our time is to reinstill in the consciousness of our people that sense of human solidarity, of being in the world for one another and because and through others," end of quote. The COVID-19 pandemic has reinforced this message more strongly than ever. We belong to each other. We stand together or we fall apart. Today, in demonstrations for racial equality, in campaigns against hate speech, in the struggles of people claiming their rights and standing up for future generations, we see the beginnings of a new movement. This movement rejects inequality and division and unites young people, civil society, the private sector, cities, regions, and others behind policies for peace, our planet, justice, and human rights for all. It is already making a difference. Now is the time for global leaders to decide. Will you succumb to chaos, division, and inequality? Or will you right the wrongs of the past and move forward together for the good of all? We are at the breaking point, but we know which side of history we are on. Thank you.